If you're clicking on this video, it probably means that you know or are at least interested in the concept of dividend investing, where you can earn passive income while doing pretty much anything. Sleeping at night, getting ready to go out, watching TV on your couch, or even while recording a video. Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Nakul Anand, and in today's video we're going to go through the top 5 dividend ETFs you can buy to earn a consistent passive income in 2022 and beyond. I'll show you how these ETFs would have performed if you held $10,000 in them over the last 10 years, how much annual dividend these ETFs would generate if you held $10,000 in them, and how much these ETFs would charge you per year if you held $1,000 in them. All the ETFs we're going to go through are by large established fund providers. They're low cost, they have a low tracking error, they offer you a lot of portfolio diversification. And most importantly, not only do these ETFs provide a consistent dividend, but they've increased in price over time as well. These ETFs should form the core of your dividend portfolio. They will help you generate a consistent passive income and create a new income stream for you. And though the dividends may seem small at first, over time as the value of these ETFs increase and you add more money to them, these ETFs will help you create an income stream that you could use to pay off your monthly bills. Just before we get started, if you're new to the concept of dividend investing, you can check out my video on dividend investing for beginners. I'll link it in the comment section below. I also won't include the ProShares S&P 500 Dividend Aristocrats ETF, which is one of my favorite dividend investments because I've already spoken about it in that video. Remember to smash the like button for the YouTube algorithm if you find this content useful, and let's get started. The first ETF on this list is the Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. The ticker symbol is SCHD. The fund's goal is to track as closely as possible before fees and expenses the total return of the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index, which is designed to measure the performance of 100 high dividend yielding stocks in the US with the record of consistently paying dividends selected for their fundamental strength relative to their peers based on financial ratios. The ETF's top 5 holdings are Texas Instruments, Pepsi, Pfizer, Merck & Co, and Broadcom. The ETF has the most weight in the financial sector, which comprises about 21% of the ETF, followed by technology, consumer staples, healthcare, and industrials. The ETF has a 10-year tracking error of 0.12 and charges an expense ratio of just 0.06%, which means if you invested $1,000 in the ETF, you would be charged 60 cents a year by the fund provider. The ETF has a dividend yield of 3.06% and distributes a dividend every quarter, which means if you invested $10,000 in the ETF, you would get an annual dividend of $306 a year. Now, this may not seem like a lot to some of you, but remember what I mentioned earlier. The ETFs on this list provide a consistent dividend and have increased in price over time as well. The ETF has a 10-year performance of 14.35%, which is very impressive. And that means if you invested $10,000 in SCHD 10 years ago, then that $10,000 would be approximately $38,200 today. So to put that into perspective, that means over 10 years, you would have made $28,200 in total return, including capital gains and dividends. And with that $38,200, you would be getting approximately $1,170 in dividends. Now, I know this is all hypothetical, but it's my way of showing you that with the ETFs on this list, dividends will increase over time because the value of your investment is also increasing over time. The second ETF on this list is the iShares Select Dividend ETF. The ticker symbol is DVY. The iShares Select Dividend ETF seeks to track the performance of the Dow Jones US Select Dividend Index, which aims to measure the performance of US's leading stocks by dividend yield, which have paid dividend in each of the previous 5 years. The ETF has 100 holdings. Its top 5 holdings are Altria Group, Onyok, International Business Machines, Valero Energy, and Philip Morris. The ETF has the most weight in the utility sector, which comprises about 26% of the ETF, followed by financials, consumer staples, materials, and energy. The ETF has a 10-year tracking error of 0.42 and charges an expense ratio of 0.38%, which means if you invested $1,000 in the ETF, you would be charged $3.80 by the fund provider. The ETF has an impressive dividend yield of 3.24% and distributes dividends every quarter, which means if you had invested $10,000 in the ETF, you would get an annual dividend of $324 a year. The ETF has a 10-year performance of 12.42%, which is impressive. And that means if you had invested $10,000 in DVY 10 years ago, then that $10,000 would be approximately $32,200 today. Now, you might have noticed that these ETFs have a stronger weight in different sectors compared to the top 5 ETFs to buy in 2022 video I had done a few weeks back. And this goes back to what I had mentioned in the previous video on dividend investing. Sectors such as utilities, energy, and materials have reliable revenue streams and a low elasticity of demand. In other words, they're considered essential goods. They also don't have to reinvest a lot of money back into the company and therefore can continue to pay consistent dividends and are amazing income stocks for dividend investors like us. If you are getting value from this video, remember to subscribe and let's continue to the next ETF. The third ETF on this list is the Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF. The ticker symbol is VYM. The Vanguard High Yield Dividend ETF seeks to track the performance of the FTSE High Dividend Yield Index, which focuses on US large capitalization equity, emphasizing stocks that are forecasted to have above average dividend yields. The ETF has 445 holdings, so it's extremely diversified for a dividend ETF. Its top 5 holdings are Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan, Procter & Gamble, ExxonMobil, and Chevron. The ETF has the most weight in the financial sector, which comprises about 21% of the ETF, followed by healthcare, consumer staples, industrials, and consumer discretionary. The ETF has a 10-year tracking error of 0.05 and charges an expense ratio of just 0.06%, which means if you invest $1,000 in the ETF, you would be charged 60 cents a year by the fund provider. The ETF has a dividend yield of 2.77% and distributes dividends every quarter, which means if you invested $10,000 in the ETF, you would get an annual dividend of $277 a year. And the ETF has a 10-year performance of 12.22%. And that means if you had invested $10,000 in VYM, that $10,000 would be approximately $31,700 today. The fourth ETF on the list is the Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF. The ticker symbol is VIG. The Vanguard Dividend Appreciation ETF tracks the S&P US Dividend Growers Index, which is designed to measure the performance of US companies that have followed a policy of consistently increasing dividends every year for at least 10 consecutive years. The ETF has 288 holdings. Its top 5 companies are Microsoft, United Health Group, Johnson & Johnson, JP Morgan, and Procter & Gamble. The ETF has the most weight in the technology sector, which comprises about 24% of the ETF, followed by financials, healthcare, industrials, and consumer staples. The ETF has a 10-year tracking error of 0.06 and charges an expense ratio of just 0.06%, which means if you invested $1,000 in the ETF, you would be charged 60 cents a year by the fund provider. The ETF has a dividend yield of 1.75% and distributes dividends every quarter, which means if you invested $10,000 in the ETF, you would get annual dividends of $175 a year. The ETF has a 10-year performance of 13%, and that means if you invested $10,000 in VIG 10 years ago, then that $10,000 would be approximately $34,000 today. Now you might be thinking, why is the dividend yield on this ETF so low? Well, while the Vanguard High Dividend Yield ETF, which was the third ETF on this list, focuses on stocks with higher than average dividend yields, VIG takes a different approach, electing to invest in stocks with a track record of increasing dividend payouts every year. That's why you'll find companies such as Microsoft, Visa, and MasterCard in the ETF. Though these stocks currently have a dividend yield of less than 1%, they've been consistently increasing their dividends over multiple years. So if maximizing your present day income is not a concern and you want to focus on increasing payouts over time, then this ETF would be the right ETF for you. The last ETF on the list is the SPDR Portfolio S&P 500 High Dividend ETF. The ticker symbol is SPYD. The SPDR Portfolio S&P 500 High Dividend ETF tracks the S&P 500 High Dividend Index, which measures the performance of the top 80 dividend yielding companies in the S&P 500 index. In simple terms, if you're looking for an ETF that holds large cap companies that pays the highest dividends, this ETF is for you. Its top 5 holdings are Baker Hughes, Valero Energy, Chevron, Sempra Energy, and Newmont Corp. The ETF has the most weight in the utility sector, which comprises of about 19% of the ETF, followed by financials, energy, real estate, and consumer staples. This ETF was incepted less than 10 years ago, so in this case, let's look at the 5-year tracking error and performance. The ETF has a 5-year tracking error of 0.07 and charges an expense ratio of just 0.07%, which means if you invested $1,000 in this ETF, you would be charged 70 cents a year by the fund provider. The ETF has an impressive dividend yield of 3.72%, which is the highest on today's list, and distributes dividends every quarter, which means if you invest $10,000 in the ETF, you would get annual dividends of $372 a year. The ETF has a 5-year performance of 9.66%, and that means if you invested $10,000 in SPYD 5 years ago, then that $10,000 would be approximately $15,900 today. And those are the 5 best dividend ETFs to help you create a new income stream and generate consistent passive income. Let me know in the comment section below if there are any other topics you'd be interested to know more about, and I'll be sure to make a video on it. Do drop a like on this video and subscribe if you find this content useful. I'll see you in the next one.